2021, beginning at 5:30. Madam Secretary, can we have a roll call?
Yes, sir. Del Brazil. Present. Steve Bryant.
Here.
Victor Garza.
I'm here.
James Mulkey.
Yeah, I'm in there too.
Monique Presses. Here. Mr. President, we have quorum.
Thank you very much, Claudia. We'll move on to prayer and pledge. Mr. Scuttle?
Yes, sir. Please bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us engage in meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group, and nurture the bonds of community. Fill us with your grace, Lord God, as we make decisions that might affect the students, staff, faculty, alumni, and friends of the East Central Independent School District. We pray that you will bless our plans and help us successfully bring them to fruition. We ask these things in your name. Amen. I pledge allegiance to
the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
honor
the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Mr. Toscano.
Yes, sir.
We will move on to public comments.
We have none.
No public comments? Awesome. Okay, we will move to action agenda. Trustees, we need to approve the delegates for the Pastor Patrick Convention of 2021. Who is all going to the convention? Victor, Steve,
Yes.
and
Last week in September.
you can't? No.
Who's registered so far?
It's just, Mr. Massenthal, Mr. Bryant, Mr. Garza.
Are you going, Claudia?
No, I can't.
So we got Victor, we got 3 people going, so we need a delegate and an alternate. You do the delegate?
I'll be there.
Okay. Do we have an alternate? You do the alternate? All right, Steve Bryant is the alternate and Victor Garza is the delegate. That is this Sunday. All right, we will move on to 5.2, consideration and approval of an order.
You don't need a motion. Vote on that?
Oh, yeah, we do. No, we don't.
No?
Delegates.
Is it going?
Huh?
It's under action agenda. I just
He's
want-
appointed us.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Okay.
talking to.
Yeah.
I was voting on it.
Move on to 5.2, consideration and approval of an order calling a bond election to be held on East Central Independent School District, making provision for the conduct of joint election and resolving other matters incident and related to such election.
Sir, trustees, in your miscellaneous packet, I'd like to call your attention first to a handout entitled Sample Measures. It has some highlighted text. It's a 2-page document, front and back. Everybody got it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if you recall, at our last meeting, the Facility Study Committee presented recommendations to the board for a long-term facility master plan with a priority list of recommendations as well as some additional recommendations. And the board accepted that master plan as well as recommendations. So tonight, what the board will be considering are some options for propositions as well as then subsequently the ballot language that will be associated with said propositions. And so there are 3 options. The first option, option 1, represents all of the items that the committee recommended to the board as priorities. And they're listed specifically. They are named in the highlighted text under option 1. The one thing that I believe is missing, Rose, is the renovations to the transportation facility. I think is the only item that I see that's missing there. Is that correct, trustees? We have It shows the 2 elementary schools, middle school, multi-purpose career technology center, renovations to Highland Forest and Oak Crest, and security enhancements district-wide, as well as the purchase of necessary sites for school facilities. So I believe the one thing that's missing is the improvements to the Department of Transportation. And then in the ballot proposition, you'll see that all of those in highlighted text are also listed specifically, and then those would be the priorities. So those would be items that, should the bond pass and the voters approve, that those items are all going to be given priority in the construction program and will be complete as listed. If there were any cost savings at the end of the bond program, the board would have discretion to take care of other facility needs across the district, with the exception of the items listed at the bottom of that sheet. It says bond proceeds cannot be used on, and there are 6 items listed there. So if there were cost savings at the end of the program, under which all of those items listed were addressed, the additional funds could be utilized by the board to address additional needs, facility needs of the district, but not to include those items.
Do you have to include that verbiage in the bond?
Yeah, so the fact that it's listing those items as priority, that delineates that. And, any further clarification? We have our attorney with us here tonight. Rose, hi.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to clarify for Ms. Barrientos, the first 6 items are actually under new law. Those items have to be in their own propositions. The last item, buses or safety devices for buses, those are permitted to be included in what I'm going to call the general proposition. If that was something you wanted to use as a fallback, if there were any cost savings at the end of the program.
So the first option just lists the priorities that the committee presented. The second option on the back of that first page includes 2 measures, Measure A and Measure B. Measure A is exactly what we just discussed. But this particular option also offers a Measure B. Measure B includes the items that were the additional recommendations that the committee made to the board, beyond the priorities. They were additional findings, but they didn't rise up to the level of the priority list that was listed first. So this particular option would combine all of the items that were recommended to the board, but in 2 separate measures. Again, in the ballot language, with priority given to those specific items listed in each measure, with cost savings available to the board, with the exception of for those items listed.
And they could vote.
They could vote for or against each if the board chose that option. And then there's option 3. Option 3 combines all of the recommendations into one measure. So not only the priorities, but the additional recommendations, all included in one measure. So if we go back to the first option, you'll see at the top that that first option would be $164,250,000. Okay? When you go to option 3, that's $172,450,000. So the difference between option 1 and option 2 is the difference between 164 million and 172 million. That makes sense? And again, when you look at all of the language, everything is specifically listed and named. And then in the proposition or in the ballot language, again, they're named as priorities given to those specific items. Those things all have to be addressed should the voters approve. Again, with cost savings being available to the board, but not to be spent on the items listed at the bottom of that sheet. Any questions about any of that so far? Okay, So at this time, I'd like to call up, Rose, do you have something to add?
I believe your handout also has 2 options for the ballot.
Okay, it does. I'll clarify that. So on option 3, and actually in our, in discussions with trustees prior, it seems to me that, and I just want to clarify, notice that on all of the other options in the bond language, there was only one option for the bond language, and it specifically named each item. In the option 3, we included 2 options for the bond language. One listed all of the items by name, and the other was a little bit more general and summarized them all as school facilities. And the feedback I've gotten by a few of you so far suggests that that listing them by name is consistent with what we've historically done, and that's what we prefer. Is that an accurate statement? Okay. All right, so this time I'd like to call Victor Kuroga up to the podium, and in your packet, or actually if you're going to hand out, a document that we've seen similar before. And what Victor is going to do for the board is share essentially a tax impact analysis for a $172,450,000 bond program, or a $164,250,000 bond program. So basically, if you choose option 1, just the priorities, or if you choose either of the other 2 options, it combines all of them together into either 2 or 1 proposition, 172,450, right? So Victor's going to share with the board what that analysis looks like in terms of tax impact, and the approach that the board could take, depending on what you choose. Victor, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm pretty lucky I got to see you all last month and now this month again. So thank you very much. It's a joy to see you all again, and thank you for having me. As Mr. Toscano indicated, we refined the numbers a little bit since the last time you saw me. We've already these 2 priorities that were given, so we'll show you what it's actually going to cost if the bond program would move forward, and our plan and strategy on how to mitigate that tax impact as much as possible by when we issue the bonds. So the first page after the cover sheet, this is your property valuation over the last 10 years. As you can see here, as you know, it's been in the upswing. On average, each year for the last 10 years, the district has grown by 10% per year, your property values. And so as a school district, this is the biggest and most critical indicator as to how much we could afford in a bond issue, and how much one penny brings us for a bond issue. So again, you're averaging about 10% per year over the last 10 years in your property value growth. So you keep that in mind when I go on to the analysis here. So the first analysis we ran is for $172.45 million. We're assuming this is a standard 30-year issuance. Remember I said you're growing at 10% per year? Well, in my analysis, I'm being pretty conservative. I'm saying that the first 2 years, we're only going to grow 7% per year. After that, it's going to drop down to 1% per year. But hopefully, if the demographic study is spot on, you're going to see growth higher than that, which will allow you to lower the INS tax rate in the future. What we're also doing is as you know, you're not going to be able to spend all that money in 1 year. And so one strategy that we talked about the last time is after the voters give us the authorization for the full bond program, it's at the discretion of the board as to when and how to sell that issuance. And so here, in this example, we would be breaking that bond authorization over a 3-year period. And just for illustration purposes, it's just a third, a third, and a third over the next 3 years, starting next August 2022, where we're looking at here in this example. So we would be selling $57.485 million per year for the next 3 years, starting next year. The interest rate is also pretty conservative. I'm assuming a 3.16% interest rate that's locked in and fixed when you issue these bonds. We just sold some bonds earlier this week, a 30-year issuance, and we got in just below 2%. And so there's a little bit of cushion there with your interest rates. Currently, our INS tax rate, the tax rate we use to pay our principal and interest on our bonds, is 21.6 cents per $100 valuation. It's anticipated that INS tax rate that we have this year is going to continue on next year at 21.6 cents. So that's the base that we're working on. So what does this bond program cost us? Well, after the third year, the maximum INS tax rate that we're projecting using these conservative numbers is 32.35 cents per $100 valuation. So to afford a $172.45 million bond program, we're estimating that the tax impact or tax increase just on your INS side is 10.75 cents per $100 valuation. However, keep in mind that that impact won't be felt until after you issue all the bonds after 3 years. So that's not going to be hitting the voters all at once. And so, and also again, homeowners who have an over 65 homestead exemption won't feel the impact of this bond program. So if you're like me, I like to see pictures and everything. And so this is a graph looking at your total tax rate since 2019, and this is your fiscal year 2019. In 2019, our INS tax rate, the total tax rate was close to $1.33 per $100 valuation. The next year, we dropped it because the state required you to compress your M&O tax rate. And so that was at $1.21 per $100 valuation. The way that was broken up, that was at 24 cents on your INS, and then 97 cents on your M&O. Then they required us to lower it even more on your M&O side. So the current year that we're in, fiscal year ending 2021, right now our M&O tax rate is 92.6 cents, and as I stated earlier, your INS tax rate is 21.6 cents. For a total of $1, a little over $1.14 per $100 valuation. Next year, because again, the state changed the school finance laws on your M&O side, you really don't have any control as to what your M&O tax rate is going to be. We have to use whatever the state tells us. So because of your continued property value growth primarily, your M&O tax rate is scheduled to have to drop by another 5 pennies coming into this next year that you're planning your budget for. So next year, we're anticipating that your M&O tax rate is 87.2 cents, and then the INS tax rate again stays at 21.6. So we'll be at a little over $1.08 per $100 valuation. So by that time, hopefully the voters would have allowed us to proceed on this bond program and address the facility needs that you're looking at. And so we would start issuing the bonds, and as I stated earlier, we're not going to issue them all at once, we're going to incrementally increase that tax rate. So what would that look like? So in the blue there, this is when the tax rate will hit for the new bonds that you're issuing. So next year, you're looking at about 23.4 cents for your INS tax rate, and it's taking it up just under 2 pennies for that first year. I'm assuming that the 87.2 cents, that's just going to stay stable. I don't know what that's going to be moving forward, and the state could always change that whenever they need. But you can see there, after we get to 2025, that's going to be your maximum tax rate based off of the conservative property values that I'm projecting, and we'll be at just over $1.19 for your total tax rate. So look and put in perspective, we could still do the $172.45 million bond program over 3 years, and that total tax rate potentially could still be lower than what it was in 2020, so just a few years ago. And so I just wanted to show you how it's going to work incrementally, and the fact, and put in perspective too, that we could do a $172.45 million bond program and still be below the 2020 total tax rate.
In 2025.
Yes, sir. Are there any questions on this before I move on? So under consideration too is a lower bond amount for the bond program. So you would be looking at $164.25 million, and that's on slide number 4 here. Same assumptions. We're selling bonds over 3 years, splitting out over 3 incremental parts. And so for this bond program, the INS tax rate increase from what the voters are used to paying right now, 21.6 cents, would go up by 10 pennies, but after a 3-year period, again, not all at once. And so that impact would be in 2025. And so the way it would look on our bar graph here is, again, we were still, after we go to the maximum in 2025, we'd be at $1.19 per $100 emission for your total tax rate. And again, we would still be lower in this case than 2020, where we were paying $1.21 per $100 average.
So the difference between the two is
0.75.
0.75 cents, so less than a penny.
Yes, sir, 3/4 of a penny. And the last, yes, sir.
So, and maybe this is a question that's got two parts. You've displayed selling the bonds, all the bond money in 3 different sales.
Yes.
Is there anything that would prevent us from modifying that if circumstances over the next few years led us to needing to sell bonds sooner? There's nothing in either the order or your presentation that would do that. It would just change the way those pennies hit the tax rate.
Yes, sir, that's exactly right. All we're asking the voters is to allow us to issue up to a certain amount, the maximum amount. After they give you that authorization, it's up to the board and the district as to when and how to issue that. I'm just doing this for illustration purposes, just to show you. But let's say we need the money a little sooner than anticipated, we could accelerate the amount of bonds that you're issuing. Or if it's not moving along as quickly, we could delay those bond sale amounts.
Or if something in the bond market changed and it was more advantageous for us to sell them earlier, that would still be, okay.
Yes, and we've been monitoring that for you, and then probably do that as well.
Okay, thank you.
So the last page here listed on is just a summary calendar for the November 2nd, 2021 bond cycle. If you would call it today, it would be fine. The deadline would be August 16th to call the election. And Rose is here from McCall Parkes and Horton. She prepared the agenda language and the bond order and is available also for any questions you might have with respect to the election.
I got a question. So back to the bond issue, the bond itself, like Steve was asking. So if the bond passes and we whichever one we go with, and so the interest locked in at the time that we sell the bonds, each one, or is it locked in at the first and then next time the other two are sold? Does the interest rate change, or could it be like what Steve was saying? Is there a chance that we might want to sell it quicker because we're seeing interest rates go up? Or is that interest rate initially the first one sold locked into the other two?
No, sir, it only locks into the amount that you're selling when you sell it. You would lock in the additional amounts at that time, but as Mr. Bryan indicated, if rates are low or they're going up drastically, we want to lock in those rates and issue more, then you're free to do that as well.
Yeah, well, having multiple sales is pretty new for us. I think we've only done it one time before.
Yes, sir.
Correct. Every other bond we've ever had, we sold everything all at once. But the last bond that we did, we had so much work going on that it made sense to sell it in different timeframes because we couldn't do all the work at one time to begin with. So why get the money and put it in the bank and not draw anything on it?
Yes.
So, yeah.
That's my question. Thank you.
So in your, thank you, Victor. Thank you. In your packet, I'll also had Judy include a slide similar to what Victor presented. But it goes back to 2015, 16. It's how to reset the tax rates from 15 to 2022. And as Victor already pointed out, our tax rate that we'll be bringing to the board at the end of the month is $1.08 total tax rate. But on this particular graphic, what I want you to look at are the INS, that's the orange bars at the bottom. And in 2015-16, it was 22.5 cents. And in 2016, the voters approved the 2016 bond referendum. And at that time, we projected that it would be 16 pennies for the 86 million, whichever exactly it was. It would be 16 pennies on the INS tax impact as a result. And so in 2017, we increased the INS tax rate 5 pennies. But then every year thereafter, you can see the INS rate actually going down. And so the reality of it is the INS tax rate only went up 5 cents, not 16. And so I only bring that to your attention because, as Victor mentioned earlier, he's using conservative projections, and we would want to do that. Our average values have been 10%. He's going with 7% the first 2 years and then 1% thereafter, correct? And then he's using conservative interest rates on what we think we could get for the sale of the bonds. And what he listed there was a little over 3%. Recently, he seems to be getting rates a little under 2%. So those things combined kind of lend themselves to the probability that what we'll see over time is less of a tax burden to the taxpayer. And that's historically what's happened with all of the bonds that the voter has approved in the district in the last couple of decades, honestly. And so just wanted the board, and you know all this information, I just wanted to put it in one place at this time, just kind of see it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Ms. Judy, can you refresh my memory on after one of the increases that we had since back when Mr. Selby was here, we were able to get some kind of grant or funding that lowered the taxes even lower? Do you recall what that was?
I think the only time we've really lowered the taxes dramatically, other than paying off bonds, were the state mandated compression of the tax rate.
This is something that was allowed to certain school districts, and we qualified as a school. Do you remember what that was?
That was called the IFA and the EDA, and we would get money from the state. But every year that your value got higher, the less money you got from the state. But we did get some IFA and EDA money, but we don't get that money any longer.
Okay.
There were some really severe restrictions on it.
Is there?
Yeah, for example, when we did Heritage, we got IFA money for the gymnasiums, which couldn't put seating in them. Couldn't do it, so it had to be, it was an instructional facility a lot. And so you couldn't, I mean, there were some severe limitations on what you could do with the money.
And so we don't qualify for that anymore?
I don't think they even have the program.
So just to very narrow, the only difference between option 1 and 3 is the dollar amounts, correct?
And the scope of work.
And the scope of work.
Yes, so option 3 is going to include the middle school renovations.
And this one,
It's going to include the ECPD headquarters and the warehouse.
this one does,
And option 1 includes, only includes the 3 new schools, the renovations to the 2 elementaries, Career Technology Center, land acquisition, Department of Transportation, and safety improvements.
thank you.
And the only difference between 2 and 3 is 2 separates those 2 into 2.
I understood you, I just didn't know, but I couldn't figure out the difference.
And so the difference between the 170 and 160 at the end of the day is still 10 cents? I mean, 0.10 cents.
It's not even, it's point, yeah, it's less than a penny.
One is 10 cents and one is 10.7.
Less than,
Less than,
Less than a penny.
either way,
either way.
both amounts.
Well, I guess, my recommendation is that the facilities committee meetings and all that stuff and what they came up with, I'm leaning towards just, doing proposition, or option 3, 172,450,000, and.
Same money. You get more for the same money.
Yeah, exactly.
Things make no sense.
Yeah, but anybody else have any comments or what y'all's thoughts are? Or-
I mean, I think it's real explanatory, and I also think that the other ways might be confusing
Yeah.
to the community. And,
The first 2 options.
yeah, I just think maybe it might be confusing and just look, cluttered, and I feel like just one proposition is explanatory enough for voting.
So, option 3, Mr. Stone.
Anybody else?
Oh, we need this recommendation and then a motion.
Yeah, recommendation.
Mr. President, trustees, I recommend board approval, the order calling a bond election to be held by the Central Penn School District, making provision for the conduct of a joint election and resolving other matters incident and related to such election.
We have a recommendation from the superintendent to approve the order of calling a bond election to be held by the East Central Independent School District making provisions for the conduct of a joint election and resolving other matters incident related to such election using option 3.
So, Mr. President, I move that we choose option 3 and accept the superintendent's recommendation to call a bond issue and make sure that we add Department of Transportation updates to the list of priorities in the ballot language.
So
I
be,
second that motion.
we have a motion from Mr. T. Bryant, and we have a second from Monique Priestley. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We will move on to item 5.3, contract with Fair County Elections for November 2nd, 2021, bond election. Mr. Thomas?
Sir, Mr. President, trustees, in an effort to make the cost of the November 2nd bond election more efficient, it allowed for fewer duplications of polling locations between the district and the county. We would like the board to consider approving myself to enter into negotiations to contract with Bear County Elections for the administration of the November 2nd bond election. At this time, it's not clear which other political entities we could enter into a partnership with to share the cost of administering an election. And so joining other entities would significantly reduce the cost, but it depends on the number of additional entities that partner with us that are available at that time. And so until we know how many entities, it's hard for us to know the exact cost. But our current estimated cost after talking to Jackie Callahan from Bear County Elections is approximately $30,000. But again, that's contingent upon the number of other entities that will be hosting the November election at the same time that we will be able to enter into a partnership. So what I'm asking the board tonight is to recommend that the board gives the superintendent or his designee, myself or designee, approval to enter into a contract with Bear County Elections for the administration of the November 2nd, 2021 bond election. Be happy to answer any questions.
Do we know, when will we know if there's anybody else, if we have an election?
Did you have a sense of when the deadline is when we enter into these relationships?
She should know after Monday. I know of 2 other entities in Bear County that have already called elections, so I suspect there'll be quite a few.
Okay. So we may know in the upcoming weeks possibly, or?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? We have a recommendation from the superintendent to give the board of superintendent of his discretion approval to enter into a contract with Bear County Elections for the administration of the November 2nd, 2021 bond election. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
I have a motion from Mr. Victor Garza. Do I have a second? I have a second from Claudia Marientos. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. We will move on to item 6, discussion on personnel. And at this time, is somebody coming with that digital box set?
Sorry.
The digital box, what time is it?
Oh, 604.
At 6:04, the Board of Trustees, beginning of August 12, 2021, beginning at 6:04 p.m., convened in a closed meeting in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Government Code, Section 551.074. Discussion on personnel. August 12, 2021, no action taken in the closed meeting.
Mr. President, I move to authorize the superintendent to negotiate land acquisition as discussed in executive session.
We have a motion from Mr. T. Bryant. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. We are at, adjournment. All right, adjournment. All in favor? All opposed? We are done. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Yes, yes, yes.
Huh?